512,000, a number I will always remember. The number of those of us who were raising hogs for America when I began farming. Today, there are less than 61,000. It is also telling that the price being paid today for hogs is about the same as it was when I began farming over 40 years ago. When I started farming, the four dominant beef meat packers controlled around 26% of the market, and today they control 85%. I would suggest that the market is dead. I'm Joe Maxwell, Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder of Farm Action. I have lived the negative impact of wrong-headed government policies and unbridled corporate power. We thank all of you for joining us here today. As our new report sets out, the U.S. has been in this position before, and in all instances, the people had to call on their government to stand up against the power of corporations. And the government did, and the market responded more favorably to the people in this country. As my opening demonstrates, the last 40 years have brought corporate power once again to levels that require us to call on the government to take on corporate concentration and its market power. The Biden-Harris administration has been hard at work to reverse the trend of concentration. Nobody in the administration has been more instrumental in taking on this challenge than Assistant Attorney General Kanter. He and his team have taken Biden-Harris's whole government approach to addressing this monopoly problem to heart, making history by invoking the Packers and Stockyards Act in two separate court actions, winning consent decrees against some of the most abusive poultry processors in the U.S., and filing action against AgriStats for providing a platform for the big meat packers to collude with each other to help set price, knock down the price for farmers, and increase price to consumers. Along with the Federal Trade Commission, DOJ adopted new acquisition and merger guidelines that restore a lens of competition for the reviews, moving the U.S. away from the failed consumer welfare standard. For this and much more, we thank you, Assistant General Kanter, for your hard work and your teams, and we thank you for being here today. Take it away.
Joe, thank you so much for that warm introduction and for all the work that you personally and Farm Action has done for so long now to fight for the American farmer. It's truly inspiring. I was listening to you speak, and there's so much left to do, but I am truly grateful to be fighting alongside Farm Action to protect competition in the agriculture industry. And I am extraordinarily grateful and honored to be here to join you all today for this important discussion. Farm Action's recent report paints a vivid picture of concentration across America's agriculture system and industry. It shows how consolidation has impacted every step of the farmer's business, from seeds, machinery, to financing and crop insurance, to meat packers and other buyers. And it explains the history of some of the misguided decisions and policies that got us here today. But today we're working to change that direction. From day one of my time in the antitrust division, agriculture has been and continues to be among our top priorities. Because we know that farming as a way of life is absolutely essential to every American. We know that farming communities are the backbone of this country, and that it is a challenging time for family farmers. Let me tell you about a trip I took, meant a lot to me last year, that really brought this home. Last fall, I had the privilege of meeting with Danny and Mary Lindell at their farm near Cannon Falls, Minnesota. That trip was organized by the Minnesota Farmers Union. We got together at the Lundell's farm for a roundtable on rural concentration. At the roundtable, it was easy to see that all this is connected. The local hospital's problems became the local bookstore's problems, the local concert venue's problems, the local pharmacy's problems. We heard about how small farmers face powerful monopolies everywhere, whether it was in natural resources, seeds, tractors, meat packers, processors, dairy. Farmers cannot catch a break as buyers or sellers. And thousands of years have to give up and shut down the family farm. Often these are family farms that have been in their families for generations. And these losses start to add up. And each one is truly the American dream disappearing, spiraling. And you can see small towns struggling to survive. It's destroying rural America. The schools shrink, the independent pharmacies lose buyers, and the corner stores vanish, the hospitals close, the local banks go out of business. The communities are suffering because of the decline of the family farm. And so what I just described did and does not have to happen. And certainly it was not inevitable. It was a product of choices and deals made in boardrooms and backrooms, from New York and Washington to Brazil and even Beijing. The deciders often didn't understand or care to understand that a small farm doesn't mean small people or small dreams. The deciders got lost in the dollars and the models and the stock options and the spreadsheets. They didn't understand what it means to work on the same land as your ancestors, your mother, your grandparents, your father before them. And they certainly didn't and don't understand that old famous adage that everyone, no matter who they are, needs a farmer 3 times a day. At DOJ, we understand that. And more than that, we're doing something about it. To see how we prioritize agriculture, look no further than a case we filed last fall against one of the most important corporations that so many people have never heard of. Joe referenced this in his opening remarks. Our complaint against AgriStats alleges that a corporation created and managed an illegal information exchange among meat processors, allowing those processors to manipulate and inflate prices. And that hurts the meat buying public and enriches the middlemen at the expense of the family farm. I know you're all following along with this case, and I encourage you to continue to do so. We're also focused on crucial issue that we've heard a lot about from farmers, the right to repair. We firmly believe that if you buy equipment, you should fully own it and be able to repair it yourself. Let's be very clear here. You should have the right to fix your damn tractor. The Department of Justice has the authority to weigh in on cases and helps courts understand the law. And last year, we did just that in a case involving Deere & Company Repair Services. Deere was trying to dismiss the lawsuit, arguing that it was allowed to deny farmers access to the tools necessary to repair their Deere tractors. We said it clearly in our brief. Deere is wrong, and the court agreed with us, denying Deere's motion and letting the case go forward. And that case says a lot about what side the Department of Justice and the Antitrust Division's on and who the law protects. We understand that working with our partners across government is critical to agriculture enforcement. And this is a key part of the Biden-Harris whole of government approach to competition. And that approach is key to revitalizing agriculture and in antitrust and, importantly, in the Packers and Stockyards Act enforcement. Our collaboration with USDA and other partners is bearing fruit. It's delivered multiple Packers and Stockyard Act cases and led to the transformative consents in poultry that are beginning to reshape the industry. I should note these are the first time in history that the Antitrust Division has used its Packers and Stockyards Act authority following referral from the USDA. We are really proud of that. In our case against Cook Foods, for instance, our decree ended a penalty provision that lowered the wages of chicken growers by preventing them from switching processors. Most importantly, in another case, we alleged that processor Wayne Sanderson was using an unfair tournament system in violation of the Packers and Stockyards Act. And we won a historic consent decree that blocked the corporation from penalizing growers for performance, delivering fairness, and greater pay predictability for those growers. We know there's a lot more to be done. And Farm Action's report, which you'll hear a lot more about shortly, makes that abundantly clear. At the Antitrust Division, we know that we can and we must bring our partnership with the USDA and the Packers and Stockyards Act enforcement beyond poultry into beef and other important parts of our food supply chain. That's one reason why we are putting our money where our mouth is and hiring more lawyers dedicated to agriculture. These lawyers will be based in the Midwest, These investigators will be based in the Midwest. These experts will be based in the Midwest, and will focus on civil and criminal agriculture antitrust enforcement. And we will expect them to focus on the biggest and most important issues affecting all of you on the ground every day. The work's going to be hard. We get it. But as the report reminds us, history shows that the American people are not powerless in the fight against consolidated corporate power. And we are proud to be here in the trenches alongside all of you. Thank you so much for having me today. Thank you so much for bringing us all together. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing to raise awareness to these important issues. It makes a huge difference. And we look forward to being there in the trenches every day, fighting with you, fighting alongside with you to protect farmers from concentrated corporate power. Thank you so much and have a great session.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Kanter, and your staff for all of this great work, and we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. I'm Angela Huffman, president and co-founder of Farm Action, and I want to welcome you all here today. At Farm Action, we've been really glad to be part of this antitrust work undertaken by the Biden-Harris administration, providing background information on various acquisitions and mergers, ag sector dynamics, the abuses that farmers are experiencing in today's consolidated farm system. One of the things that we've learned is that we were always hustling to pull that data together. We recognized that there wasn't a go-to source out there for information on agriculture industry consolidation. And whether you're a reporter, a researcher, policymaker, an advocate, you might have struggled to find that data as well. We set out over a year ago to develop a go-to source, which we've recently launched. We call it the Agriculture Consolidation Data Hub. And we developed it to be a tool for everyone. There's a primer on the basics of food system consolidation for people just getting started. We have high-level statistics on every sector, the key players, and what percentage of the market they each control. There are short fact sheets on various industries. And then for folks who want to take the deep dive, there is the report that we've come together to discuss today. And we also plan to add a library in the future so that the academics on here and around the country can also showcase their great work on this hub as well. The report that we're going to share today is the cornerstone of this hub. We set out on an investigation to create a definitive resource on consolidation across ag sectors and to lay out the history of monopolization in the US ag economy, showing that we've been here before and looking at how government cracked down on monopolies in the past and freed farmers, workers, and consumers from corporate control. So now I'll turn it over to report author Basel Musharbash. He is the principal attorney at an antitrust law and policy firm called Anti-Monopoly Counsel. And Basil's going to share the report's top-line findings, and then he'll be joined by Farm Action's Research and Policy Development Director, Sarah Carden, to facilitate the rest of this webinar. And as we go, please put any questions you have in the Q&A box, and we'll have time to get to those at the end. And Basel, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Angela, for that introduction. And thanks to the entire team at Farm Action for organizing this event and everybody for joining us. My name is Basel Musharbash, as Angela mentioned, and I work at an antitrust law and policy firm called Anti-Monopoly Counsel. We work with family farmers, small businesses, local governments, and groups working on their behalf with respect to monopoly problems in rural America. And I'm very glad to be here to share some of our findings from this important report. I do want to mention, while we had AAG Kanter with us, I work out of a town called Paris, Texas. It's the second largest Paris in the world. We have our own Eiffel Tower and possibly the best croissants this side of the Atlantic Ocean. They're baked by a guy named Kit. And Kit came up to me yesterday when I was getting my bagel, my morning bagel, and he said he just wanted to talk about the Visa monopolization case that was just filed. And the reason he wanted to talk about it was because he was concerned about swipe fees. And I think it just shows how impactful the work of the antitrust division has been, and look forward to it continuing. With that, we can dive into the report. The report itself is called The Kings Over the Necessaries of Life, and it covers monopolization and the elimination of competition in America's agriculture system across the entire supply chain. The title is derived from a quote from Senator John Sherman, who is the Sherman Act, the primary antitrust law in this country, is named after. When he was talking about the law and the need for it in 1890, he said, "If we will not endure a king as a political power, we should not endure a king over the production, transportation, and sale of the necessaries of life. If we would not submit to an emperor, we should not submit to an autocrat of trade with power to prevent competition and fix the price of any commodity." That sentiment guided our work on this report. It's important to, the antitrust laws are designed to prevent this kind of outcome from arising. A situation where you have a single corporation or a small group of corporations controlling competition, controlling prices, controlling the lines of development for entire industries. It's designed to prevent that kind of consolidation of power. Unfortunately, today we see that that problem is with us still. 125 years later, we're dealing with the same issue, not because the laws have never worked, but because we haven't been enforcing them very well since the 1980s. This report is intended to help change that, to help enforcers, policymakers, reporters, the general public understand what is going on in our food system and take action to remedy it. So let me talk a little bit about what's in the report and how it could be useful. I know Angela covered a little bit of it, but we'll dig a little bit deeper here. We wanted to provide a central reference resource, as Angela mentioned, on the structure and organization of agriculture sector industries for all those groups that I mentioned. We also wanted to go a little further and excuse me, examine the consolidation of economic power and elimination of competition by dominant firms in the agriculture sector through a legal lens that lends itself to antitrust enforcers and other policymakers at both the federal and state level taking action, so that they can be able to look at this report and see a basis for launching an investigation or maybe bringing a lawsuit. That's what makes this report so unique. That's what makes it something that hasn't been done before and hopefully can spur positive action on this front. The final thing we tried to do is we wanted to make sure that we uncover the policy choices that brought us here, so that we make clear that this is not something that we have to accept, but something that we can make other policy choices to bring ourselves back to fair and competitive markets in America's food system. So what are the findings that we made? After all this work, what did we find? We investigated for a year. The main top line finding, and the finding that's most concerning and that was most shocking to me, is that roughly 36 corporations now get to decide who gets to farm and how they farm, what food gets produced and sold in this country, and how much we all have to pay for it. And I don't mean that colloquially, I don't mean that loosely. We found in surveying the agriculture supply chain, we found that either a single firm or a small tightly coordinated group of firms have amassed monopoly power, that is, in the legal sense of the power to control prices or exclude competitors from a given market, in nearly every major industry that manufactures and sells farm inputs, that buys or processes farm crops, or that distributes food to the public. What this means is that a farmer, looking to build a farming business today doesn't have a whole lot of options about what they can grow, doesn't have a whole lot of options about how they can market that product and what it goes into. And then across the supply chain, consumers have fewer and fewer options of what food they're going to consume, and they have less and less power to push back on price increases for those products that they need. This power, it's important that we note, was not earned, nor did it arise by accident. It wasn't something that was foreordained by any economic forces or by technological imperatives. That's a narrative that a lot of farmers heard in the 1980s and 1990s. It was said a lot that consolidation was just inevitable, that we should just accept it. And it was also said that it was good for consumers. What we find is that that's not the case. In sector after sector, we find that the reason consolidation happened was because of mergers and acquisitions, serial mergers and acquisitions, that were not necessarily motivated by efficiency, that were not motivated by any kind of imperative, but were simply acquisitions for control. They were designed to amass control over the market so that a company can exercise a certain amount of power. Other tools like exclusive contracts and discriminatory pricing arrangements were also used to help these dominant firms, as they consolidated the market, create handicaps that entrenched them in place and prevented new market entrants, smaller players, from challenging them. Now, someone might say, well, let's say they did all of this. Maybe it's benign. Do we really need to care? And the answer is absolutely yes. The answer we find is absolutely yes. The dominant firms across these industries abuse their power to rob farmers, workers, and consumers. I think a great example of that is in fertilizer, for example, where 3 companies have essentially split the fertilizer industry into 3 segments: nitrogen, phosphate, potassium. Each of them dominates one of those segments. And since the 2000s, since the late 2000s, because of their power, they've been able to reap Apple-style profits on products that haven't been improved materially since the 1960s. It's that sort of extraction that has been facilitated by the monopolization that we've seen across the agriculture sector. We've also seen companies throttling innovation, like in the seed and pesticide sector, where the consolidation of control over intellectual property and technology used to develop new seed varieties and new pesticides has stultified the development of seeds for different plants, as well as seeds that increase yields and pesticides that work well against and don't facilitate the development of resistance in different pests. And across the board, we see companies acting in a variety of ways to suppress startups and small businesses and make sure that they stay on top instead of allowing fair competition to determine who wins in the marketplace. We'll dig into this a little bit more deeply in the Q&A, but in the discussion with Sarah, but it's something that came across in researching the entire report to me, is that several firms, you'll see several firms' names come up repeatedly because they have been serial monopolists working across a variety of different sectors to consolidate firms, consolidate power, and then entrench themselves. Firms like ADM and Cargill and JBS. And we see that in some cases, particularly, for example, ADM, they developed a playbook almost that they use in industry after industry to enter, get power, use that power to fix prices or, reach market allocation schemes with their purported competitors, and then entrench themselves. These, I think, the takeaway from the report should be that these firms deserve close investigation. And that gets me to the final point from the report, the final key finding for us. It doesn't have to be this way. These firms are smart and powerful. They've executed strategies over decades, but they did this intentionally. And the US government allowed it because we made policy decisions not to enforce the antitrust laws to the fullest extent. We can take action to fix that today, as Assistant Attorney General Kanter made clear. I think something that we realized, we didn't set out to do this, but we realized it in the course of researching the report. And it was great that we did, because the current reality is grim, and we needed a hopeful signal, some kind of hopeful, something hopeful to tell us that this can be changed. And we found that, looking back at the 1940s and 1950s, we found that they faced the same thing we face today. They had 40 or 50 years of antitrust non-enforcement behind them that allowed corporations to consolidate power over the entire agriculture sector, over many, large swaths of the economy. But then the American people, through their government, took action, concerted action, to beat back the exploiting monopolists. With the help, under the leadership of Robert H. Jackson, the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice launched the greatest trust-busting campaign in history, breaking up hundreds of monopolies, hundreds of cartels, bringing thousands of cases. And within just a decade, farmers could, for the first time in 3 generations, buy their inputs from competitive markets and sell their outputs, their crops, into competitive markets. Consumers weren't faced with monopolistic food processors. They could get their milk and their eggs and their meat from competitive markets. We were able, within a decade, to restore the free enterprise system in this country. And that's why I think this report is so important. It's that it tells us that we can do it, but it tells us also about the risks of what might happen if we don't. In the 1940s, when this push happened against monopolies, it was spurred by warnings from the Federal Trade Commission, from various actors in the political system, but specifically from the Federal Trade Commission and the Antitrust Division. They warned Congress repeatedly until the message stuck, that, as this quote says, this capitalist system of free initiative is not immortal. It's capable of dying and of dragging down with it the system of democratic government. Either this country is going down the road to collectivism, or it must stand and fight for competition as the protector of all that is embodied in free enterprise. That's the choice we face today, too. Either we, because of the concentration of power, because 3 dozen corporations control who gets to farm, how they farm, what food gets produced and sold, how much we all have to pay for it, they're essentially gaining the power to regiment farmers, workers, and consumers. That's not Americanism as we've struggled to create it. That's not the American ideal as the American people have fought for it throughout our history. And we have to make a choice now again. Do we want to accept central planning by this self-appointed oligarchy? Or do we want to stand and fight for competition? I think with the speech Assistant Attorney General Kanter just gave, at least we know that his decision is in the right place. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Basel, for, but it's a great note to wrap up a really profound report that you put together. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you a little bit more about, get into some of the details. It is tough to figure out where to begin with such an extensive report in a webinar session such as this. But one place I would love to start is, you talked about this control that these dominant firms have over, and this finding from the report, how they exert this control over throughout our food system that ultimately gives them the power to decide who's farming and how they farm and what they're farming and what we all eat. And I'd love to get into some more examples of that, a little bit more specifically, how they're using this market power in various sectors to exhibit that degree of control.
Sure. Where to start? I think we can give a whole bunch of examples, but I think we can start, for example, with the tractor and combine sector. That gives every farmer needs machinery, tractors, combines. They might need different sizes. They might need them for different purposes, but everybody needs machinery to operate efficiently. And through the 1970s, we saw a very dynamic farm equipment and machinery sector. There was a lot of entry and exit. Firms succeeded and failed based on the merits of their products. They catered to a whole variety of customers well into the 1960s and the early 1970s. Things began to shift in the late 1970s with the deregulation of railroads, which made it much harder for smaller manufacturers to source steel on the one hand and ship their products on the other hand. You used to have a whole ecosystem of local and regional manufacturers. And those essentially went away with the deregulation of railroads. But the real sort of shift in the sector that really gave one firm, John Deere, control over the lines of development in terms of trade in that sector came in the 1980s and 1990s. The Reagan administration essentially retrenched enforcement against mergers and acquisitions. They also essentially abandoned enforcement against exclusive contracts and deals and tying arrangements, allowing dominant firms to foreclose access for smaller rivals to distribution channels and other channels they need in order to get their product to market. The way John Deere took advantage of this in the 1990s is they started saying to their dealers, you can't distribute anybody else's product. You have to distribute John Deere only. And in the 2000s, they started adding technology to their tractors so that farmers could only repair the tractor at the dealers. So independent repair shops could no longer repair John Deere tractors. Now, that could be okay if John Deere had 5% market share, but John Deere has 60% market share in the tractor and combine market. And so when it uses technology to foreclose independent repair shops from repairing its tractors, over time, independent repair shops stop having much business to go off of, and they start closing, and they did. Now we have very few independent repair shops that can work on tractors. And when they started saying to dealers, you can only deal John Deere tractors, that meant that foreclosed a large number of the dealers in the country from working with any other tractor manufacturer. So what does that mean for competition in tractor manufacturing? It means that if someone wants to compete with John Deere, they not only have to put out a great tractor, they also have to roll out a dealer, an exclusive dealer network, and they also have to roll out their own repair network. They have to enter at 3 stages of the market. That necessarily impedes competition in tractor manufacturing and entrenches John Deere, and it allows John Deere to control the direction of development. And we've seen them do that with the size of the tractors that they produce, and the functions that those tractors serve. It has become increasingly difficult for small farmers to access tractors, combines, other machinery that is suitable to the size of their operations, and especially to operations that have mixed crops and need a variety of different machines. So with, in that sort of circumstance, we see how control in an agricultural input sector essentially allows one company to pick winners and losers in the agricultural marketplace.
Yeah, and you're hitting on. So I think that not everyone, but people are familiar with this concept of farmers being pinched, and Assistant Attorney General Kanter references from their as both sellers and buyers. And there's, I often have this image of an hourglass in my head when I talk about this. But one of the things I really loved about your report is you also expounded beyond that, beyond the buyers and the sellers, but also into the financing and risk management sector. Do you want to talk just briefly about how that plays into this?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen just radical consolidation in both the crop insurance and the agricultural finance industries. The community banking industry, which is one of the primary sources of financing for farmers, has consolidated dramatically since the 1990s. We used to have something like 15,000 banks in this country. Now we have a little over 4,000. And the community bank portion of that accounts for only about 12% of deposits in this country. Four gigantic banks, control over 50% of the deposits in the United States. In addition to that consolidation in community banking, we've also seen consolidation in the farm credit sector. I'm sure folks on the call may be familiar with the farm credit system. Essentially, it's a specialized government enterprise that is owned by farmers and is supposed to provide credit to agricultural to farms for various reasons. It was created to make sure that farmers have access to financing institutions that understand the farming business. But they have dramatically consolidated as well. We used to have something like 2,000 farm credit institutions. Now we have, around 60. What that has done is make it much harder for a small farmer to access credit, not just because it's hard to find a bank, but because it's hard to find a local bank or a local financial institution that can understand their circumstances, where they can know the loan officer and the loan officer can get to know them and make judgments based not just on but not just based on numbers on a sheet of paper, but based on their own judgment of the credit worthiness of the person, of the farmer. what that has done on, in addition to that is make it so that, if a farmer wants to go get away from the conventional path of just, monoculture corn or soybean operation, single species livestock operation. If they want to start something like a vegetable or fruit crop farm, they're going to have a lot of difficulty. A bank that doesn't understand the business or that doesn't know the farmer might say you don't have markets for that, or might ask them to make sure that they secure contracts for their crops in advance. It makes it very hard for small and beginner farmers to access credit. And then on top of that, there's the crop insurance problem, where basically 6 underwriters have consolidated the majority of the market for crop insurance policies. And they've essentially settled on serving just grain and oilseed monoculture agribusinesses, and particularly larger ones. Those are the most profitable, easiest ones to underwrite. You don't need a lot of effort to underwrite those operations, and so they're easy to insure. And so they just abandoned, more or less, the crop insurance market for small farmers, mixed crop farmers, non-conventional farmers. And when those farmers can't get insurance, they also can't get loans, because a bank will usually ask for a crop insurance policy. So altogether, this consolidation in both of those sectors makes it that much harder for a farmer to deviate from the standard approach that's pushed by the largest agribusinesses or processing operations and input manufacturers.
Thanks. So yeah, and many of you probably do not know, but I am also a vegetable farmer when I'm not at Farm Action. And so, one thing I just want to thank you for, Basel, is, and in this report, is, I think for our farmer readers, what this really lays out and makes clear is that struggles that farmers are up against today in this world, trying to start their own operation or keep a family multi-generational farm afloat. They're not alone, right? One of the big takeaways, and you mentioned this from this report, is that this isn't something that's, their struggles aren't attributable to personal failure, which I think a lot of farmers really struggle with. There's a really significant change in the market than there was when a generation ago, and it's a new game, and it's a really important not only consolation, but moment for us all to come together. And I love how, we did find this glimmer of hope in this report, that we have been here. It's easy to feel that we're looking downwards, and there's where, we come up with all these really massive figures of concentration. Like where is there hope for a smaller individual competitor in here? And the fact is, it's not the first time, as you said, and it's time for us to come together and recognize that it's time to do something about that. So I'm just going to take a few minutes of your guys' time to share some of Farm Action's thoughts on this, and then we'll get to the Q&A. So give me a second to get my screen share here. So, I loved your cry to arms, Basel. And so for everybody who's listening here today, I want you to know that Farm Action and its sister 501c4 organization, Farm Action Fund, has been using the findings of this report to further inform our understanding of what the kinds of changes we need should look like. We are in the process of developing a transition document and a congressional handbook that will advise the next administration and Congress on actionable steps that they can take to address the issues we have covered here today. And we have already developed the framework for these documents in a food and agricultural policy platform that I'm sharing with you. So Too often, these decisions about our food system are made without hearing from farmers. And so in developing this framework, we wanted to compile a list of farmer-recommended policies that, if enacted, would lead to a more resilient and competitive food and agricultural system. And in doing so, we realized that these policies are really split into two different buckets. The first bucket focuses on identified enforcement opportunities to level a playing field so that everybody has a chance to compete, while the second bucket focuses on targeted investments that will help rebuild a more fair and resilient farm system. Sorry. So Basel did a really great job laying out a picture today of how the playing field is no longer fair. Whether you're an independent cow-calf rancher or a startup fertilizer firm, there are just too many barriers stacked against you, and your chances of success are extremely slim. And it's not due to shortcomings on anyone's behalf. These pathways to success, the inputs, the markets, credit access, et cetera, have all been locked up with the majority of us on the outside. So here are 7 things that lawmakers can do that will help build a more fair and marketplace. Number 1, we can start by protecting farmland from foreign, corporate, and billionaire investors. Large corporations and the ultra-wealthy have increasingly begun to utilize farmland in their investment strategies. This ends up driving up farmland prices and pushes farmers out of the market, giving corporations and foreign entities unprecedented amounts of control over our supply system. We need to enact protective measures that will help ensure farmers are the ones controlling U.S. farmland. Number 2, strengthening the Packers and Stockyards Act so that it once again protects farmers and ranchers from unfair and anti-competitive practices by large meatpacking and poultry processing corporations. Number 3, pushing back against unlawful restraints by dominant equipment manufacturers and giving farmers the right to repair or to choose who is doing the repairs on their own farm equipment. Number 4, reforming USDA's checkoff commodity programs to restore them to their original purpose, a collective tool for product research and promotion, and prevent farmers' hard-earned dollars from funneling into lobbying organizations of the industry. Number 5, enforcing truth in labeling. We see this time and time again. This comes up in the report. Farmers are pushed out of mainstream markets and they work hard to create niche markets for themselves, only to see the dominant corporations move in and use deceptive practices to take over this market power. Number 6, implement a federal ban on price gouging. Consolidation of market power today has enabled corporations to take advantage of increased costs or supply chain disruptions and drive up their profit margins. And number 7, promoting more vigorous overall antitrust enforcement. We keep hitting this. History has shown us that this has happened before. Vigorous antitrust enforcement works. It also shows us if we don't do anything, we should not assume that anything will change. It's time to really continue on the type of leadership that Assistant Attorney General Kanter and others are doing in this regards. And for our second pillar, this is focused less on enforcement and more on the rebuilding. So in the framework development, we looked at this first pillar as an opportunity to help make space for more competitive and resilient food system. And then we would need the second pillar to help jumpstart opportunities for new competitors. So today, we hit on many of the barriers that new market entrants face. And here are 3 different opportunities to help farmers and other food system participants get over some of these hurdles and contribute to rebuilding our food system. Number 1, increase and improve access to farm production tools. We talked today about some of the ways the credit and crop insurance sector has influenced who is farming and what they are farming. In order to rebuild a more fair and resilient food system, we must ensure that all farmers have access to good risk management tools, credit, and land. Number 2, make smart investments in smaller meatpacking plants. The nature of meatpacking creates a particularly vulnerable bottleneck, which dominant firms have been all too happy to take advantage of. Today, farmers and ranchers are extremely limited in where they can take their animals for slaughter and the prices they're able to get. And number 3, implement values-aligned government food purchasing. Consolidation has deprived many market participants of market access. Government is a huge purchaser of food. These dollars should be going towards the type of food system that best benefits the community, not further entrenching monopolized or oligopolized markets. And combined, these 2 pillars offer a workable framework for candidates and elected officials to enact meaningful change in our food system. And so with that, I would love to take a moment and open this up to the audience for some questions for Basel or myself. So it looks like we've got quite a few in the chat. Let me just take a look here.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of questions.
Yeah, I'm just going to pull. Here we go. So here's one. So we hear, thank you for this critical report. 2 questions. 1, does your finding show how the monopoly agri-food business impacts policy, i.e. lack of transparency in the government's spaces, conflicts of interest, thus impeding on democracy? And number 2, what avenues are there or would you like to see for civil society, non-farmers, but allies to engage with the report and increase pressure for farm action policy positions?
So I think I can take number 1, and I think number 2 is more in your bailiwick, Sarah. I want to say, there are certainly impacts from the consolidation in the food system on government policy and government's ability to regulate effectively and willingness to do so. Like a great example of this is, for example, JBS, which is a meat packer, dominant meat packer, the largest one. They have secured such a large percentage of chicken, beef, and pork production that even though they were shown to have secured this dominance, they bought up a whole bunch of companies using financing from the Brazilian government that they secured by bribing thousands of Brazilian officials. This was proven in a court by US enforcers. This kind of corruption normally gets a company knocked out of government contracting. But the USDA has not been able to debar JBS from contracting for government contracts for meat products because of how much power it has. That's just one example, but we see this across the food supply chain, where the consolidation of control either makes it difficult for the government to act, or hides the real issues, violations of the law, conflicts of interest, harms to people behind sort of a veil of consolidated corporate control. We need, it requires investigations to be made into these industries by federal agencies which have subpoena power, which have the ability to compel disclosure of information in order for us to really understand what's going on and make sure we're we're enforcing the law and protecting the integrity of our government.
Thanks, Basel. And then, the second part of that question, real quick, because we're running out of time, is, we see this report and the various other materials Angela mentioned on the hub as resources to help other allies engage. We know that changing decision makers' minds on these issues requires facts and information. This information is not easy to access elsewhere, and these industries are complicated. The other thing that I loved about Basel's report is each sector provides a very thorough overview to help understand the nuances within each sector that these market control will influence and impact. So I think on that one. And then we probably have time for just one more question. We've got one here. Are there any state level policies that could help shift the balance of power towards farmers and producers? Any states doing better than others at this? I think that's a great question. Yes, there's, there's several instances where some of these policies have not found opportunity or stalled on the federal level. Right to repair is a really good example of this. While we have at Farm Action Fund worked hard to help support and pass a federal bill on agricultural right to repair, that has not found a pathway forward yet. However, Colorado is the first state, and it has been introduced in many, maybe 20 or 30 other states. I don't have the fact right off the top of my head right now, but states have begun to take action on this and introduce their own agricultural right to repair bills. And there's definitely a pathway forward there. Once a certain number of states have moved forward and passed legislation like this for, John Deere and other equipment manufacturers, it becomes they have to eventually comply nationally, even if we don't pass a federal law, just because they can't operate with a different, policy within each state at a certain point. So I think that the pathway through on states, we also several, attorney generals in states have also led great work on this. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity there. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that, Basil.
Yeah, I'll add, just that state AGs have incredible powers under both state antitrust law and federal antitrust law to bring actions and to investigate what's going on in different industries. I think, what we try to amass is evidence in almost every sector of, the evidence suggesting monopolization, attempted monopolization, restraints of trade, potential collusion. These should form the basis for state attorneys general and the federal agencies, hopefully, to launch investigations and dig deeper. We're a private group. I'm a lawyer in Paris, Texas. We don't have subpoena power, as I mentioned, but state AGs do. And hopefully, what folks can do is talk to their state AGs and let them know that this is important. This is an area they need to dedicate resources, and they can get a lot done if they focus on this.
Thanks, Basil. And on that note, I think we are probably just about out of time. So I want to thank all of you for coming here today and joining us. And I'd love to thank Basil in particular for producing this incredible report and coming here today to share some of these findings. It's been a real journey, and it's just a really amazing piece of work that he's put out there for us all to use. And I'm excited to utilize it in our work. And for all of you, you should be receiving a recording of this webinar in case you missed anything or want to share it out. We appreciate it, and we'll thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Sarah.